so many people trusted me. And I felt like I had this advantage, this step up, because I had done such a great job and built these connections already working for the other investor. And I also knew who to go to if I got stuck or I had a question. I knew those people from having that past experience as a property manager.
If you're an active real estate investor and you're looking to do larger deals, you're in the right place. We are going to go and take the conceptual type of stuff that you listen to from other real estate podcasts and bring it down to the tactical, the nitty gritty, the actual actionable types of things that other real estate investors that went big did to grow their own real estate empire. You're listening to the Go Big Live podcast. I'm your host, Matt Drouin. Hey, what is up, everyone? I am Matt Drouin, the host of a Go Big Live Real Estate Investors podcast. I am psyched out of my mind today. I have a very special guest, Miss Ashley Kehr, co-host of the BiggerPockets Rookie podcast, which, in my opinion, I think is the best podcast on planet Earth. And the reason why is because I think that it's labeled as rookie, but they have a ton of great stuff that I get out as nuggets every time I listen to it. I've been in the business for 17 years, and there is just like, those nuggets that get on there, they get really specific, kind of inspiration behind my show that a lot of real estate shows are very conceptual. They're not like, they don't get down into that like nitty gritty tactical type of stuff. So major kudos to her. A little bit of background on Ashley. Let me pull up her bio here. You might know her as one of the voices behind the BiggerPockets Real Estate Rookie podcast, although she is certainly not a rookie. Since starting her journey in 2014, Ashley has grown her buy and hold portfolio to over 30 units. And this doesn't include the 130 residential and commercial properties she oversees through her property management team. Join us as we dive deep into her expertise on finding under market value properties and the importance of partnerships and creative financing in achieving her remarkable results. Thanks, Ashley.
Did you write that bio or did my assistant?
I think
so that's really good. I keep that.
I think my producer Jessica, maybe she.
Yeah, it's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, maybe she used ChatGPT. I'm not sure, Jess. Did you use ChatGPT?
No, I didn't.
No, she didn't.
Yeah,
she's the original. She's not AI. She's the original I. Intelligence.
What's really funny is I actually said write a bio for Ashley Kehr on ChatGPT, and it actually mixed me and Ashley Wilson up, and an investor, a really good friend of mine that lives in Philadelphia, and like some information about her, it like spewed out for me, and it was so funny. It like had us mixed up.
No, absolutely. So, all right, I want to dive into here. So, the question I ask all of my guests is: you were born, and now you're here. What happened in between?
Well, I grew up in a small little town called Boston, New York, not Boston, Massachusetts. And looking back now, I realized there was a lot of signs in my childhood that I was meant to be an entrepreneur, that I just took me a while to realize that when I was younger, me and my friends would paint rocks and sell them on the side of the road. And there was all these little money-making schemes that I had. We would put on shows and charge our parents tickets to get in to watch us, all these different things. And I graduated college wanting to be a CPA. And so after college, I started working at a CPA firm. I lasted for about 6 months, and I put in my 2 weeks notice in the middle of tax season. I was like, I cannot do this, sit at a desk every day. This is not for me. I literally have anxiety driving to work. I dread it. I want to do anything to get out of it. So I put my 2 weeks notice in, and I just decided it was time for me to have a baby, and I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And fortunately, I was in a situation where I could do that. But then when I got pregnant right away. And then while I was pregnant, growing up, I had a best friend that lived next door to me, and I was very close with her family. And her father approached me and said, I just need help getting organized. And for some reason, he thought because I was an accountant, I could help with that. And he's like, here's all the things I have going on. I need you to help me. And it was just going to be a part-time thing. He would pay my health insurance, which was a huge thing for me because I had lost that when I quit the CPA firm. And I could work from home and just whatever hours I wanted to be flexible. So this was great. What that organizing ended up being was managing a 40-unit apartment complex. So he had somebody running it for him, and they just weren't doing a good job. He knew nothing about it. So I started April 1st, 2013 in a little tiny office with no windows, no AC, a little attached bathroom, boxes full of lease agreements, and a drawer full of keys. And he wished me luck and was like, okay, here you go. And so from there, I had to teach myself property management. And I eventually built out systems and processes because I was ripping my hair out. I was working way more than part-time, and I was forced to build those processes and systems so that I just didn't like kill myself working. And from there, I just kind of saw what he was doing and said, you know what, I want to do this too. And my first partner was actually his son, and we bought our duplex together.
Oh, sweet. So what happened there? Because I mean, I think that Ashley, now for those of you who don't know, Ashley and I collaborated on a couple of real estate events in Rochester, New York. She was so gracious to, come from Buffalo. And that's the last time I saw Ashley. And then before I knew it, she was like co-host with Tony Robbins' son on the BiggerPockets Rookie podcast, and this major rock star. I mean, you started from somewhere, and I'm not sure if that stage that you were on that we collaborated those events were was one of your first stages, and kind of how you've progressed from that moment in time.
Yeah, that was probably, my first, second, third, maybe. At that point, I'd gone to a couple other in-person events. I had done like a personal finance meetup before where I spoke at, but definitely one of the first for sure. And so once I started the property management company for this guy, he bought more properties added on, and then I started purchasing my own. And I actually built out 2 property management companies, one for him, one for me. Mm-hmm. And then I started buying my own properties, and I eventually started an Instagram account. And that's how I was kind of discovered by BiggerPockets. I would tag BiggerPockets, Brandon Turner, and everything. And then I eventually got to be a guest on the BiggerPockets podcast. And I think that's how we actually connected, was after maybe that episode aired maybe. But from there, I then interviewed to be the host of the Rookie podcast. And once that happened, I decided I want to be able to focus more on that. And I didn't want to manage for this other investor or even manage my own. And I hired a third-party property management company, took over. So they managed my properties and the last 3 years. I still did asset management for both of those portfolios. Mm-hmm. And then recently in May, things were not going well with the property management company. So I left them, the other investor left them, and then we partnered together to create a property management company where we are only managing our own properties. And then we have a team that pretty much takes care of everything.
Absolutely. So like I said, in our green room here is that we talk about big deals, or, big deals relatively to individuals, right? Because a 10-unit deal might be a big deal to somebody, whereas that might be peanuts to a guy like Matt Faircloth, for instance. So tell me about that first big deal, and let's make that a case study of this episode.
And not to sound like a BiggerPockets rookie, but this deal was actually made possible by BiggerPockets and signing up for the forums to message people on the forums. So this was back in 2017, so way before anything with the podcast for me. Mm-hmm. I was driving by this brick building in this small town where my kids actually go to school. And I was like, I just love that building. And it was vacant. And there was a sign for a commercial real estate broker on there that it was for sale. So I just called, and it's like, I was just wondering about it. I was like, I have no idea what I would do with the building. There's 2 commercial downstairs, 2 residential upstairs. Mm-hmm. And he starts like asking me a lot of questions and digging deep into my experience and stuff. And I was kind of like off put. And then finally he said, well, the building is actually owned by my dad. I'm just selling it for him. I'm a broker, but my dad has about 10 other properties in that town, and he needs to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. He's getting older. He needs to retire. He just needs to be done with them. They've been too much of a headache. Would you be interested in those? And I said, yes, of course. So I think it was like the next day I met him out and I toured the properties. And at that time I had no idea how I was going to pay for these. I didn't have a ton of money or anything. So I went to the BiggerPockets forums, and that's where I started learning about creative financing. So I actually took a rental property that used to be my primary residence, and then we built our own house. But that first rental had no debt on it. So I went and I was able to get a commercial mortgage line of credit. Mm-hmm. So it acts like a line of credit. I can pull it off whenever I want. So I got that set up, and that would cover the cost of 3 of the duplexes. Mm-hmm. And then there was a 6 unit that was included in part of this. And this is what we call the golden goose, where, they weren't selling the 6 unit unless you took some of the other rinky-dink duplexes with it. And so for that, I negotiated seller financing. We did a 12-month term where it was interest only at 7%. And then at the end of the 12 months, it was going to be a balloon payment. So that would give me enough time to raise the rents a little bit, make a couple repairs, increase the property value, get it appraised, and then be able to refinance. And I ended up refinancing, getting my check from that refinance the day that my money was actually due to the lender. It was to the owner. It was a very stressful time period for me, but I think he would have extended if I needed to. But yeah, so that was kind of my first experience. And I couldn't collect all the properties at that time. There were still 2 properties that I couldn't afford to take down at that time. And I wasn't sure enough about them. And that was that original 4-unit building that I first called on, and then another duplex. So about 3 years later, this would have been in 2019, right before COVID, the son called me again and was like, my dad's got to get rid of these. We'll sell them to you for $60,000 if you take both of them. And previously, 3 years ago, just for that 4-unit commercial building, they wanted $90,000. So I was like, okay, great. They price reduction by $30,000 and again, this other duplex. Well, I went and looked at the other duplex. It needed a new roof. It had an old grocery store in the bottom of it, and then a residential apartment upstairs. And I'm like, I don't think this town can support 3 vacant commercial units that I could easily fill. It's a very small town. There's not a ton going on. It's going to be hard enough for the 2 and the 4 unit. So I said, you know what, I will pay $40,000 for both. And they said, done, no hesitation. Mm-hmm. So I came up with the cash for that to pay the $40,000. And then I actually wholesaled the duplex to somebody else for $20,000. Before I closed on the deal, I signed the contract to another buyer. So they actually closed on the duplex and I closed on the 4-unit property. And I was able to get that 4-unit for now $20,000 instead of the 90 they wanted 4 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, so there's a lot to unpack there, as they say. So you didn't have the cash to take down the 2-unit and the 4-plex at that point in time. So this took you a little time to take those down in this relationship with this property owner. So was the 4-unit and the duplex vacant or just the 4-plex?
So in the 4-plex, the duplex was vacant. In the 4-plex, in the upstairs, there was a lady that had lived there for, I think, 10 years at that point. And then when I had first viewed the apartment, the other apartment was vacant originally in 2017. And there was major repairs that need to be done. And so when I went back and saw it 3 years later in 2019, 2020, I was like, well, that apartment is vacant. And the son was like, no, my dad's renting it out. And I was like, how can somebody be living in there? Like, it was bad. And there was a couple that was living in there. And once I took over, I ended up letting them know that I would not be renewing their lease because we needed to full gut rehab that unit. And they ended up moving out and moving somewhere else. And then the tenant that was in the other apartment for 10 years, she's still there. And we did, electrical and plumbing updates to her unit.
All right, excellent. So what was how did you finance the repairs? Because it sounded like, these were pretty cheap properties and probably had a lot of deferred maintenance, that sort of thing. Was this your own cash, or would you dip into that line of credit that you had on that other asset that you had? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So once in 2017, when I bought the 3 properties, I went and refinanced 2 of the duplexes, and I left 1 just free and clear because I'm trying to be very cautious, not over leveraging myself. So I was able to pay off a large portion of the line of credit by refinancing 2 of the duplexes. Then for the repairs, there wasn't a ton of repairs that actually needed to be done on those properties. Those duplexes were all rented out. So I just kind of, as time went by and people moved out, I would go in and renovate it and Like one of them, I think was like a $10,000 renovation. And that was drywall repair, painting the cabinets, the vinyl plank flooring, things like that. And actually my son and he was, I think like 6 or 7 at the time, me and him did that whole thing ourselves because we actually did that unit during COVID. Mm-hmm. But for the 4 unit, that was our huge major renovation where it was a full gut in the apartment upstairs and in the 2 commercial units downstairs. And that's where I really had to get creative because prior to that, I had only done cosmetic rehabs where, slap some paint on, put new flooring in. But this was, we're going to have to rip apart the walls, rewire, do plumbing, build the walls, new drywall, everything. And I didn't have any experience with that. So I had partnered with this guy, Joe, on a duplex, and we had talked about partnering on more stuff. And this ended up being a perfect fit where, he was a landscaper. So during the winter months, he didn't have a ton to do. So I said, you know what, I'll give you equity in this deal. I'm the one that acquired it. I'm going to pay for the $20,000 to purchase it. And then I will fund a portion of the rehab. And then if we go over a certain amount, you will fund the rest of the rehab and you'll do the labor on it. And I'll give you 40% equity in the building. And then also my plan was to put a liquor store in one of the commercial units. And I said, I would give you 40% of the liquor store also, but he owned a bunch of Subway franchises. And I said, I do need the help of your supervisor who handles all of that for you to help me start the liquor store. Cause I don't know a lot what goes into, managing employees, things like that, insurance, what I needed. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of our agreement. We kind of bartered and traded and put sweat equity into the building. But I also worked alongside him during COVID because there wasn't much else that you could do. And we knocked out those 3 units, getting them renovated in the 4 unit during like a 4-month period. And then as far as the cost, I used my line of credit or just I would pay cash as I was working and paying out money. And then he ended up funding the rest of it when we went over a certain amount.
Excellent. Now let's talk about the seller financing, because this actually becomes a matter of discussion when purchasing larger commercial real estate, especially stuff that's not bankable. I have a student, shout out to Josh Rosenberg, who just closed on a 135,000 square foot industrial facility that was 100% vacant, and banks aren't going to touch that stuff, right? So seller financing definitely becomes key, but was this your idea or was it the seller's idea? How did you kind of walk through that conversation? Because it sounds like you learned a little bit from BiggerPockets forums, that sort of thing, but tell us about that story.
Yeah, so I came up with the idea and I was really nervous about it. I invited them to meet me at a restaurant and I wanted to sit down and go over a letter. I wrote up 2 letters of intent, one for the duplex saying I was going to use my line of credit and I would pay for the duplexes that way. Mm-hmm. And then another one asking for the seller financing. And so I sat down with them and I remember I was so nervous and it was like, 3:00 in the afternoon. It wasn't really like lunch or dinner. I was like, are they going to like order food? Am I going to be like stuck here talking to them for a while? And like, I was like so nervous. I ordered a drink and I thought they would order a drink and no, they just ordered water. So here's just me drinking by myself, presenting these letter of intent. And so they just asked a couple questions. We were probably there 20 minutes together or whatever, going over and stuff. And then they ended up leaving and they said they'd talk about it, whatever. And I think there was a little negotiation. I don't remember exactly, but they pretty much accepted what I had offered. We just changed a couple things in the letter of intent. But yeah, and one thing that I always do too, is I always include the amortization schedule and say, look, even though I'm paying you, the 6 unit, I think was like $145,000 maybe. I'm paying you that, but over the next 12 months, you're going to make an additional X amount in interest too. So really you're making this amount, and show that to them too. And then I had gotten a letter from a loan officer for a local bank that had done a couple finances for me on my properties and had him just write a letter like, I paid my mortgages on time, stuff like that to give me a little credibility. I even brought my tax returns, all this stuff, and they didn't even care to look at that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the one thing as well, is like being super transparent, because I've definitely, I always submit more than one offer when I'm buying properties, because I like to give a customized disposition solution, so to speak, to owners of commercial property. And I find that it's a good way to like find out, and it's almost like a matter of discovery with that property owner and really understanding like what makes them tick. And I don't even ask them, would you be interested in holding the mortgage? I ask them, would you desire cash at closing, or would you like to defer your capital gains a little bit and get a stream of income post closing? And they're like, what is that? I was like, that's seller financing. So that's really cool. I'm just asking, like, whose idea was it to have a 12-month term on this deal?
That was definitely my idea, because I was like, that will be enough time for me, which I definitely should have asked for more. But also 7% was kind of a higher interest rate at that time too. When I ended up refinancing, it was a lot better. So for me, that was just me thinking like, I don't have to do that many renovations. They're all on month-to-month leases. I can easily increase the rent and that'll give me enough time to refinance it. But yeah, that was my limited mindset there.
Yeah, because like I've done those deals before, and I've done some hard money deals before. I borrowed money from our hard money lenders and on a 1-year term. And I've always felt like it's a gun against my head, especially, there's always something that goes sideways. So having that additional runway, I always ask for 5 years on my seller finance deals. And if it's a year or less, and I know if it's like a smoking hot deal, maybe this was a smoking hot deal. That might be. Hold on one second. This is the thing with having a live studio audience. All right, I'm going to mute you.
That's why I got to go find the right stuff. Yeah. I don't know where he is.
There we go. Hold on. Yeah. All right. We'll have to edit that out, or maybe keep a little bit of in. It shows like this is like a real deal here. So going forward, let's bring this forward a little bit. The business plan was to acquire these deals through some seller financing. Tell me about these deals now. Did you refinance them and get all of your cash out of it? Like, tell us about the process through there and what they're doing for you today and what they've done for you for the future.
Yeah, so the 6-unit we refinanced within a year, and we've kept that same mortgage on it. So it's cash flowing pretty good because it's a low interest rate, and we didn't even maximize our loan to value. We just took out what we needed for the 6-unit. We didn't take anything extra. And that property, we still have that one in our portfolio. And then one of the other duplexes, and one thing too that I got creative with was not everything went into the same LLC. So that 6-unit went into an LLC that I'm partners with a guy named Evan. And then in one of the duplexes, I actually put in my personal name at that time, and I went and got a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on that property, which again is another nice low interest rate compared to today. Mm-hmm. And that one actually was the one me and my son had renovated together, the downstairs. And the whole time that I've owned it, somebody has always lived in the upstairs, and they just recently moved out. So that's like my next renovation to do for that property. And then one of the other duplexes, that one I put into an LLC with the same partner, Evan. And so we ended up, that was the worst house. That one was like leaning sideways. The apartments were okay. We did some cosmetic stuff to them, but the actual structure of the building was not that great. And so we ended up, part of the package, that property was $17,500, and it cash flowed great, but it was just like a headache property. All these random things would always just happen to it, or we couldn't get good tenants in there. And so I ended up selling it at the peak of the market, and we sold it for $60,000. So just great appreciation. Or not even appreciation. It was just that we bought it at the right time and sold it at the right time. And then the last duplex that was included in that package, that one only bought for $20,000. And that one, my brother for Christmas, I pulled his name for Christmas, and I actually gave him, I think it was like 19% ownership in the property. And I wrapped up the LLC documents and, made the LLC name some joke from our childhood and gave him equity in that property. And we just sold that property last year for, I think it was like $55,000. We ended up selling for it.
Excellent. So if we can back up here in terms of like, what was the total basis and the basis and the capital stack in the acquisition, like what was the total like price for this portfolio that you paid?
So for the three duplexes, it was 17,500, 20,000, and then I think 60,000 was the nicer one. And then the 6-unit was 145,000. And then for those units, we didn't do a lot of repairs or anything up front. It's just over the years, we painted one of the buildings or we did cosmetic updates, but there was nothing major up front where, okay, we need to put 10 to 20 grand into them. And then for the 4-unit, so we bought that for 20,000. We ended up putting $70,000, which was mostly material. And then for the electrician and the plumbing, we sourced that out. So $70,000 all in. And so we were 90,000 in total. And that ended up appraising for 220,000 when we were all done with the rehab. And we ended up just taking, even though to appraise that high, the cash flow couldn't support a mortgage that high on it or the rental income. So we ended up only taking out $100,000. So we just have $100,000 of debt on the property. And now it's been a couple of years. So it's knocked down maybe 98,000.
So if you were to kind of like use round numbers, like through this deal, like how much value did you create?
Yeah, I mean, even just from that 4-unit, the $130,000 in equity built into that, if you're going off of appraised value, as far as what it would sell for, I don't know. And then when I sold those 2 duplexes, I mean, right there was already $40,000 to $50,000 in profit from those properties that we gained from the sale of them. And then the 6-unit, it basically appraised for when I purchased it, a little over what I purchased it for and what I had put into the rehab. I'm not that could probably sell for 200,000 now. I don't really know, but I've never had it appraised again.
Yeah, excellent. That's what you can do with like when you're going like scaling larger is that, especially when you're going commercial 5 units plus, one thing I would look at is like, here's a slick trick for you, Ashley. If you decide to do a refinance in that 6-unit, is when you bring that to community bank, you're going to get a what's called like a blind appraisal bid, where they'll have like basically here's 5 appraisal bids that came in with the prices on those or the cost on those, and they're usually like there's the first 3 are like around maybe $2,000 or something like that, and then you'll get these top 2 they're like 10 to 12 grand on there. Like, oh my god, like why would I ever pay that much? Those top 2 blind appraisal bids are from national appraisal companies like CB Richard Ellis and Cushman Wakefield, which they give you a much lower cap rate and much more favorable valuation on those. So sometimes makes sense to go with the higher appraisal bid, especially if you're like, and you don't have to take out that much debt, right? But if you're, hey, just belts and suspenders, I just want to make sure I have no appraisal problems, because generally people don't have appraisal issues on the purchase. They have an appraisal issues on the refis. They become in disappointingly low. Yeah. And I have shed many tears.
Because on purchases, they have the purchase price to work off of.
Yeah. But yeah, just a little slick trick out there this week. We're actually.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. Cool. I actually did have an appraisal issue recently. It's actually the property that I'm sitting in where I kind of built my podcast studio. And it's 30 acres with 2 cabins on it. And we completely renovated this whole cabin. Like it was just the concrete studs and it had never, ever been finished. It had been built and never finished. And then the other one was built in 1998 and still has everything from there, but still needed, lots of changes to it. And so we crunched through, did a lot of rehab, everything through there. And I used hard money on that. And I needed an extension on the hard money, which was written in that I could ask for an extension. I just needed to get a broker appraisal. So it was just a real estate broker that would come out and do the appraisal. And he appraised it for, I can't think of what the amount was, but then maybe like 327. I think it was 327,000. And I had bought it for 230. And at that point, maybe put 70,000 into it. And so once I was done, a couple months later, I went to the bank to do my full refinance and I had an appraiser come out and it appraised for 320.
Mhm.
So the difference in those couple months is one cabin now had a complete bathroom. It didn't even have anything in the bathroom except the drains in the floor and a kitchen, no kitchen, and then no flooring throughout. And somehow the property value decreased by 7,000. So I get on, write this whole letter, like, here's what to do. And what the issue was that we ran into was they took the one cabin as the main house.
Mhm.
And the second cabin, they just added $20,000 in value, no matter the fact that it had 3 bedrooms, it had granite countertops, it's all brand new, no matter what, it was just an additional dwelling unit. And that appraiser always used $20,000. Then for our comparables, used property that was on like 1 or 2 acres. And this is 30 acres. And he only added $20,000 in value for 30 extra acres. And, you can't find 30 acres for $20,000. So it was just like an eye-opening experience for me as to like, here are things that I really need to dive deeper in before I actually even start a project, as to, can I find somewhere an appraisal of a similar property, and what is that appraiser actually going to look at? And so we had to fight the appraisal, and we ended up getting it close to what we wanted after a long back and forth with the bank, the appraiser, everything like that. But it was just like a eye-opening experience that like, that's something I need to really do my due diligence on, especially if it is a unique property like this, where it's not just single family home with, nothing extra.
Yeah. Become friends with an appraiser, a residential appraiser and a commercial appraiser, because that friendship, and believe me, I've had them walk through properties before I started a project. I'm like, hey, I'll pay you $500 for your time to help me kind of just a desktop analysis of this whole thing to see where I'm at. Because I've had way too many heartaches with appraisals coming in lower than I expected.
Yeah.
My most heartbreaking story is I ran my numbers wrong. I didn't understand commercial appraisals, and I wound up with $100,000 cash in refi in order to take out my hard money lender, lest he foreclose on the deal that I put all this blood, sweat, and tears into. So that was the first time I had to write a $107,000 check at closing. And I was like, all right, never again. I'm going to find a way to manage this risk. So we're bumping up against our time for live Q&A with our live studio audience who are patiently waiting right now. So Ashley, just some parting words of advice in terms of those people that maybe own a couple rental properties, they're looking to scale into larger deals. What would you tell them?
Well, the first thing would be to go to biggerpockets.com and go to the bookstore and check out my book, Real Estate Rookie. It's a great guide to getting your first deal, or even if you're kind of stuck in getting your next deal. But the first thing I would do is, if you are working a job right now and you have some kind of time flexibility, is get a second job with something in real estate. So maybe that's doing maintenance requests for a local investor. Maybe that's showing apartments. Maybe that's like helping out in a property manager. Maybe that's cutting the lawn at properties. There's so many different things that you can get into for real estate. But when I started, I was so easily able to get financing in my first duplex. And I was able to have all of these resources and connections because I was working for this other investor and I had done his loans. I was managing the property, and so many people trusted me, and I felt like I had this advantage, this step up, because I had done such a great job and built these connections already working for the other investor. And I also knew who to go to if I got stuck or I had a question. I knew those people from having that past experience as a property manager.
Excellent advice, Ashley. So if you are listening right now to the recorded version of this podcast, you want to get in a live Q&A, exclusive live Q&A with our esteemed guests like Ashley Kehr, Matt Faircloth, Brian Burke. All 3 of those people are actually going to be at BPCon next month. You got to get involved with our Facebook group called the Go Big Live Real Estate Investors Group. We talk about scaling is the number one subject there. Again, Ashley, the name of the book is Real Estate Bookie. Yeah, we're here. Real Estate Rookie, right?
Yes. Yeah. Real Estate Rookie. And then I also have another book that just came out that I co-authored with Tony Robbins called Real Estate Partnerships.
You call them Tony Robbins, or is it
Tony Robbins? That's because it sells more books.
I know you guys made that joke on your podcast. So definitely check them out if you haven't already, and subscribe and leave I'm imagining you're probably gonna leave a 5-star review, because they're an absolute dynamite pair when it comes to hosts. So definitely check them out. I'm going to get a handful of books, and hopefully Ashley be so gracious as to sign them for me so I can bring them back home to Rochester as a cool souvenir to give out. Will you do that for me, Ashley?
Yeah, I would. Just bring an extra suitcase and I'll fill it for you.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Ashley, for being on the show, and we'll catch you soon.
Okay. Thank you so much.